Hello, Valerie.
Hello, Olga.
Today I can say that I have a personal selfish interest, which I decided to record right now on the computer. I've just watched an entertaining video with the participation of Mikhail Levin. This is such an astrologer. The theme of the video is how to think to become a magician. And this video is about forbidden knowledge, magical occult traditions, and reveals the topic of the origin of this knowledge. In general, I suggest we discuss this topic. There is a certain list of questions here, which was formed after watching this video. Well, I propose to start with the fact that it is mentioned that occult tradition says that 67,000 years ago, the civilization of Atlantis perished.
You know, I'm also familiar with this video. I got it not so long ago, by the way, thanks to your prayers. And indeed, this is the very video that makes sense to discuss. Because the application was made, on the one hand, fair and very serious, when it came to the fact that knowledge, it is true knowledge, and the way of thinking that forms the concept of a magician. Moreover, it immediately follows from here, if the knowledge is correct, then the poppy is correct and positive. If the knowledge is incorrect, then Max somehow limps a little.
How to define something?
Do you know what raised my temperature the most? People themselves have raised the question of the possibility of compromising the very concept of Mac and the way of thinking of magic. That is, okay, now let's get to your question. I was also surprised by this statement regarding the age of Atlantis. And, unlike many other researchers, you are very well aware of this. I still try to go from science rather than from esotericism. And, thank God, the recorded knowledge has been preserved. It was first written on papyrus, knowledge regarding Atlantis. And then, due to the fact that papyrus is a very short-lived carrier. Despite the fact that modern science claims there are a number of ancient Egyptian papyri that are thousands of years old, this is not true. Yes, and I have serious doubts and evidence about this. So, papyri live extremely short, so very important knowledge about Atlantis was transferred to the stone at the time. In this case, I'm talking about the Denderian zodiac. This is a catastrophic zodiac. It is interesting because, firstly, it has been preserved in a fairly complete form. Then it is executed in as many as 5 invariants, among which there are round ones that, like a clock face, show such a global precession time, that is, it is a cycle of 25,920 years long. And on this dial, as marked on the calendar of this date, there are linear ones that unfold the aspect of time, in a slightly different form. But it is there that they are clearly shown. And, by the way, in the book, and in some of my articles, I write and show that Atlantis, despite Plato, perished 13,675 years ago from today, which is very reliably calculated using a calculator. In principle, it is even possible to calculate this date using paper and pencil. Moreover, on the Denderian zodiac, these dates, the main dates, events that played a decisive role in the fate of the solar system, and therefore the civilization of the solar system, they are spelled out there very clearly and very correctly. So, to answer your question about Atlantis, it died 13,675 years ago, as a result of the fall of a very large planetoid that fell in the area of the Azores Shoal, the Azores Islands, which led not only to powerful earthquakes, not only to a tidal wave, not only to a tsunami, and not only to the deviation of the axis of rotation of the Earth, first by 20 degrees to the south, and then by 20 degrees to the west, so the planet also lost its orbit. And so the loss of orbit is a critical event in the energy system, not only of the Earth, but also of the solar system. We all understand very well that the solar system is a single organism. If we look at the solar system from the point of view of the principle of anthropopotence, we will see here a connection with the physical body, and with the number of energy shells, and with the rhythms of energy shells. And we understand that if something in the system of the human body, especially in the power system, crashes and changing the rhythm, it leads to severe consequences. Accordingly, the most severe consequences occurred in the solar system, which had a tremendous impact on the fate of the solar system, and the civilization of the solar system, and the planet Mars, and Tiamat, and the planet Earth. As part of our conversation, and as part of our future course, which we are gradually approaching, I will discover all these nuances that are valid if we consider them from a position of knowledge, and a person clearly knows what really happened. Without fantasies, then the way of thinking of such a person becomes correct. It's like in medicine, when you know the diagnosis well, you can accurately choose the drug. But if you don't know, but fantasize, the consequences can be disastrous. That's the answer to your first question.
But then I just want to understand. It's just not the first time I've heard this figure 60 or 70,000 years ago. I'm trying to figure out where it can even come from. Hypothetically, do you have any ideas at least?
In general, historical esotericism has one problem. They operate on information received from so-called contacts. An attempt to obtain information through the astral field is a direct contact with people who are extremely uninterested in the correct development of humanity. This is one of the most important topics. I want to say that if the number one topic in the universe is, for example, the knowledge of God, topic number 2 is reincarnation, then topic number 3 is the problems of the astral world. This is the very world where Lucius registered. Lucius today, and this is a reality, is one of those who are extremely not interested in human development, as Americans are not interested in the development of Russia.
Here, by the way, is a question here, again, based on the assumption that the main, so to speak, the main unit firm where the civilization of Egypt came from was just Set. What do you say on this topic?
Yes, this is a statement that just shocked me. And I will not hide that I experienced extreme inconvenience for such statements in this video. Because here either a person is not aware, well, let's forgive him, he just blurted out without thinking. And the second thought is that if he, after thinking and knowing, blurted it out, then he did it intentionally. And then there is no need to talk about the sound thinking of a magician, in the best sense of the word. This is also an extremely important topic. Somehow, you and I have become such two people who cannot calm down on some simple topics. We are constantly raising some extremely important topics with you. So, this topic, the topic of Seth, from this plane of the astral shell, it is critical. What the priests warned about. Chance is proud, jealousy. Almost crawling on their knees, with tears in their eyes, they said, "Guys, well, don't. The first God who, as it were, created Egypt." And this idea requires clarification. It was Osiris, of course, not Seth. It was Seth who killed Osiris.
Again, everything was distorted, everything was reversed, the seats were rearranged.
Absolutely. If very, very briefly, then is such an Osiris in general in ancient Egyptian mythology, but tradition. Osiris is a personified embodiment of the idea of the existence of an intermediate link between a very low-level civilization, at the primitive level, and cosmic civilizations. The same Egyptian says directly, I emphasize, not quite the correct translation, that Osiris is the god of the afterlife duat. But one has only to take care, well, at least a little bit. Shake the dust of laziness into yourself, and go deeper, and read, and analyze ancient texts. As soon as you come to the unequivocal conclusion that, first of all, the duat is not the afterlife, but this is what we call the total energy shell of a person, integrated into the energy shell of the earth, that is, into all seven, aura to aura, like a matryoshka doll. And these two components, they are like a matryoshka doll inserted into the aura, into the energy system of the solar system. And the cosmos, then the duat, is the very world inside which other highly developed civilizations live. Accordingly, a traveler along that cosmic duat is one who returns to Earth, bringing with him the wisdom and knowledge of the gods. Why do I later talk about the period when Mars fell and Tiamat fell, when Lucifer was imprisoned, his opportunities were limited? And from this world, trying to save his life, he tried to do everything possible to ensure that the consciousness of people, their actions fueled his interests. Accordingly, let's just answer ourselves the question, what is the astral plane? The astral plane is Seth's world. This is Lucifer's world. That's it. Accordingly, returning to the thought with which I started, when the great initiates and initiates asked don't. Well, Lucifer did win at that stage of humanity. This was expressed in the myth, where Seth kills his brother with a trick. In other words, humanity is deprived of the possibility of direct communication with the outside world, with outer space. And a long period begins. They dismembered Osiris, scattered him to different parts of the earth. Pay attention, the female energy of Isis, through love, finds her husband in pieces, gathers him together, and through this, gives the world a chance to be reborn. Let's not forget about it. We will come back to this more than once. When I heard this statement, that Egypt was created by Set, I shuddered so, let's assume that I misheard. We will, although, of course, the statement was made directly, loudly.
I want to dig a little more into what you said. The astral plane is the world, Seth, and all. And all this is not entirely clear. After all, when you talk about the Dindirian zodiac, you have a certain justification. Here's a little bit about the background. Where did this information come from? Why do you have to believe in this, and that's it?
Here the questions are, in fact, as if there were no faith at all. First of all, as I have already mentioned, quite serious texts have been preserved, warnings that one should not be friends with this in any case. For a long time, I have been practically engaged in researching the issue of astral travel. And I have my own experience in this sense, which I have led to the unequivocal conclusion that in all my practice, I do not remember a single contact, and I not only participated in them myself, but also analyzed others. There was nothing that would have played at least some creative role, enriching people with truthful information. There have been many religious movements in the history of our civilization, such as the Mazdakites and other black currents. We will not mention their names in the story, where, for example, one of the deep central ideas was that any person on the path of his spiritual growth should as soon as possible. In fact, in Hinduism, this is partly there. Leave your physical body and go to God Almighty, to the benevolent, to the wise. And the teachings that I recall in my book, in the section that is called the set factor. The idea was that people should bring their body to some extreme. We must as soon as possible, through debauchery, through the use of some drugs, I emphasize, different. And the waska, as it is correctly called, is from the same section. The idea is that a person should deal with his body as soon as possible. Who wants more information? I will not raise it here. Find a book. It is mine on the internet. You will find the section. Everything is described. So, here we see a very clear contradiction. The oldest text says that man is a projection of God on earth. God, who created myriads of his own projections according to a single genetic code, and through people's eyes, placing them in different times, in different epochs, different planets of the solar system, and not only, he observes the world. He learns the laws of that world, the environment in which he himself appeared. In other words, God improves himself through man. The idea is clear. And suddenly they say to you, yes, what are you? You need to leave your body here as soon as possible. You need to kill it in any way. And soar into the sky to the good God. And there with him, in general, enjoying life is a question. In my opinion, it doesn't even make sense to ask a question. And it's so obvious that the 2 points of view are directly opposite. Only one, obviously, is about evolution, infinite, important, and very difficult, as a path. And just an attempt to substitute a leg for both people and creators, with the words, let's leave here to God as soon as possible. I repeat and repeat. Well, what could be brighter than this thought to show what the astral plane is, what set is, Lucius? Although in all history, I would have touched Lucius to a lesser extent. Because in order to touch this person, you need to know very well what it is about. But as for the set is an energy dump, where all the negative experience of a person, people, civilizations, planets, galaxies accumulates. It's all there. The world is infinite in its possibilities and invariance. But it is both a plus and a minus. It is designed in a certain way to harmonize the situation on the path of spiritual transformation. And we will also talk about this in our course. Everything is very difficult here. Therefore, going back to where we started, correct thinking is the only way to walk a narrow path between two mountains in Shambhala and beyond.
Correct thinking, as I understand it, will be formed after passing our course.
It's a strong word, but one of the ideas of the course is to hint to people where this invaluable knowledge lies. Here's where you can take. If you want to check, yes, check. The problem is that people are so kind. They are so good when they say to him, Egypt, yes, of course. It was also established by Seth. And the people, yes, how interesting. And he believes, after all. After all, no one checks, but it should be checked. And check Uvarov. Only I never assert anything unfounded. If anyone gets to my books, there are a huge number of references to literature at the end. Read it and you will see it all. What I'm telling you has nothing to do with fantasies. These are not my ideas. These are ideas that came from ancient times. My task is to transform it all into an understandable language and convey it to those who need and are interested in it.
I will return to our topic, with which we started, about Atlantis. We have sorted it out. Then, as the legend that we listened to says, some fragments were formed, and these fragments are some cities of the gods, like, for example, Shambhala.
Actually, there were no such god cities on the body of the earth. This is incorrectly submitted information. Firm, this it is astral information. What really happened? We will disclose as much as possible in detail in the course. I will come back to this one more time. In the meantime, let's schematically designate. Indeed, in the history of any planet, and we are talking about planet Earth in this case, there are situations when, on the path of its own development, the planet must create a kind of center of intellectual power. First, any planet forms a biota. This biota becomes more complicated. The meaning of this biota is to create certain conditions for life forms capable of carrying the rudiments of reason to arise on the surface of planet Earth. Of course, in the end, a humanoid life form appears. Please note, this is the only form of life in the universe that can transform biota energy into psi energy, that is, into the same spiritual energy. From the moment this form of life appears on the planet, the interaction of the consciousness of each of us, the consciousness of civilization, and the consciousness of the earth leads to the creation of this intermediate link, which today we call Shambhala. Some 800 years ago, 900 years ago, this place was called the abode of Babel. Jesus said that he came from there. Texts have been preserved on this score. So Shambhala is an extremely important energy 50% and physical 50% environment that plays an extremely important role in the evolution of the planet, galaxy, solar system, if you do this and so on. What is the main function? What we call Shambhala today is what receives the energy flows of the cosmos, and they come to Earth, as we would say now, in raw form. And these flows in their pure form are deadly for the unprepared consciousness of people. As deadly, direct, unfiltered, in no way transformed, and transformed cosmic radiation. The energy of the cosmos, they're lethal. Like the energy of the sun, it would have killed us right away, if not for the magnetosphere. So Shambhala is like a magnetosphere for the Earth. It takes these flows, transforms, I emphasize, this is very important. Therefore, the best way to imagine the situation is as planet Earth. It's in a kind of, chemical flask that has a long neck. There is something like cotton wool at the exit of this neck. Well, let's imagine this is Shambhala. Everything that comes here, it passes through Shambhala, is transformed, and already transformed just for us, for our way of thinking, for our vibration, for our chakras and capabilities. It comes and reaches people through the ground and so on. Everything is as it should be. On the other hand, when there is such a powerful statement to the universe, and Egypt was actually founded by Seth. And in general, we have cities of the gods here, we fought here and so on. This kind of nonsense should not get into outer space. It sort of gathers there, like smoke inside this flask, then penetrates this long neck, then reaches this filter. And there is nothing left. And nothing splashes out into outer space. This is Shambhala. Shambhala is the plane where the best of the best go after they disincarnate. It is in Shambhala, and from Shambhala they come to Earth as messengers, as Jesus came, in order to fulfill a certain mission. And, unfortunately, most often, their lives a little smarter.
People.
That's a strong word. Yeah, make people human,
I meant people with people.
Well, yes, I understand. That's exactly what I mean. Thank you, a very good addition. Therefore, Shambhala, I would say this, I would not touch Shambhala with my hands either. Because in order to touch, you need to at least find out. And it would be nice to vibrate in resonance. Thank God that Shambhala is pragmatic enough so that people with a similar way of thinking, which is not quite correct, do not get there. They have nothing to do there. They will be filtered out, and they will be somewhere in the background from this. What was shown to the world, take it now, eat it, and change and transform. We will talk about what happens to a person after death separately. This is also an extremely interesting topic that was discovered in a certain way in the ancients. Therefore, returning to Shambhala, it is by no means a city of the gods. Shambhala is, as I have already explained, an extremely important component of the hypothalamic pituitary system, through which control commands from space come to Earth, they transform, and are distributed throughout the human body, through the peripheral nervous system, through the central one at different ends of our body. In order to restore order, to treat someone's brains. The same thing happens, in fact, with Shambhala. But when those who could be called gods came here, based on the tradition to which we are accustomed, it was after the War of the Gods. Then yes, these highly developed people, they really settled separately from people. And this was dictated, firstly, not only by their desire to get rid of the annoying pestering of people with some requests. They have their interests were very pragmatic. And in the territories where they lived, such territories were. Hyperborea was partly a territory. The mainland of Mu in the Pacific Ocean, which is sometimes called Pacifides, I like more than Lemuria. There really lived those whom we can call demigods, gods. And here on Earth, in the entire history of their existence, they have never fought with earthlings, much less with themselves. On Earth, no way.
Then, a little clarification about Shambhala. You say it's half an energy structure, and you explained what it looks like. I, in principle, understood, but you say it's 50% physical. That is, do I understand correctly that logically it should find its physical projection in our world somewhere?
Of course, they find it, of course. The Earth is multidimensional. And as a snowman, he doesn't live on Earth the way we usually think about it. They suddenly appear in droves at some point. They walk for a certain number of days on Earth, and then they also disappear. It's like they come from some other world. And the fact that they come from a parallel dimension, people described it, they witnessed it in the form of bonfires at night. We look out of nowhere, not out of darkness, but out of nowhere suddenly appears once, so floated out. As if the TV screen turned on, just looked at us, and back once and went in. And that's it. And the space closed. That's where those who are on the physical plane come from. They are like us, they have the same physical bodies. But one of the conditions, in addition to a sufficiently high spiritual level of development, is the state in which spiritual goals force a person to start working with his physical, energetic shell. I'm talking about all those practices that purify the body, making it clean, energetic, and so on, so on. When it can be allowed to pass into this environment according to its condition. You can't go there so easily. There, their guards immediately meet you and escort you back. I've had to deal with such people in my life. They come rarely. They come in the area of eastern India. There is somewhere the border of Pakistan, here in this place. Their age is about 300 years old. They look very young outwardly. They come, solve some issues of their own, not personal of course, but those topics and those issues that concern Shambhala. And they return there in the same way. Therefore, I briefly draw the situation that, yes, there is both an energy plan and a physical plan.
There is one more point that I would also like to clarify. You said that Shambhala accepts certain commands, transforms them, and transmits them to the planet. Now, the parallel transmits physical bodies to the planet and to those receiving antennas. That is, some people who are able to receive this energy, right?
Generalize. Some important evolutionary significant energy is information. She comes to Earth the same to everyone, but in response to it are only those who have the brains, as we say, sharpened. Those who think in a certain way in this direction change something in themselves.
And it is in a certain frequency range.
Well, he prepared his body, naturally. I think there is no point in wasting time on any detailed explanations here. It is clear that a person must be ready in every sense of the word. And then suddenly, eureka. And he begins to feel an inner urge to do something not for himself, but for people. It is not just a movement in self-knowledge that begins. There is an urgent need to do something for yourself and for humanity. This is this flow of stimulating energy, containing, if you want, commands to action. That's why I gave this example, an analog of the physical structure of a person, where through the hypothalamus, the pituitary system, this control center of the body, certain commands come from above, they are transformed by the hypothalamic pituitary system. The brain is a transformer. And then the whole thing is distributed, scattered through the nervous system in different places, to the place where it is necessary, in order to carry out certain necessary work, to correct some or other violations. It's the same with Shambhala. She receives this energy, she distributes it, she distributes information through Kailas. Kailas is the receiving and transmitting link. Kailas is the hypothalamus, the hypophytic system of the earth, and then through the energy system, through geofractures, on which, as on acupuncture points, certain Buddhist temples stand. Buddhists who accept this flow, they then begin to carry this vibration into people. That's the point, you know.
Is it impossible to catch this vibration without Buddhist temples and monks?
Do you understand what's going on? We have an environment in which we live, especially Yoid, it is very heterogeneous. There are places where the energy is strong, and there are places where there is practically no energy. But it is necessary to work with the whole body of the earth and humanity, drawing an analogy. We are all very heterogeneous. Look at what we are discussing with you now, and do not simplify. It's very difficult, as there is no single technique for the treatment of a disease for all people. We are all different. Each has its own nuances. So the information that come through Kailash across the grid. Some Buddhist vibrated in one range, and another received the same flow, vibrated in another. The system must be unified. But in order to see all this, you know we back to where we started. Only true knowledge, as they say, is the highest cosmic wisdom. The one who truly loves carries around him the color of knowledge, so that people do not walk in the darkness of lies. Therefore, somehow it so happened that you and I are acting today as those who are trying to launder this situation. Yes, when I came across this conversation, to be honest, I was shocked. Because there seem to be respected people who are heavily burdened with some high ranks in the astrology environment and so on. But to carry such Shailyu in humanity. And let's try, without quarreling, to convey to people what is really happening, not simplifying, but not unnecessarily complicating, but with love. Then you and I will have a future.
Well, then move on to the next question.
Oh, come on.
So further, unfolding this topic, There is information that UNESCO scientists somehow came to the conclusion that 25,000 years ago there was a nuclear war, which just destroyed the remains of this most ancient civilization of Atlantis.
I come across it regularly.
With scientists from UNESCO.
Well, yes, such statements. And once again, I will not be lazy and say that, of course, there was no nuclear war and could not have been. And what happened? There were attempts to destroy those meteorites and asteroids that flew to Earth, and they could cause irreparable damage on planet Earth. The first eternal problem is that once every 33 million years, the solar system passes through a stream of asteroids. And then 66 million years ago, all the dinosaurs died, and so on. In other words, this factor led to the destruction of almost all forms of life capable of carrying the rudiments of reason. I say a lot of things about this, and I probably will say more. In the face of this cosmic imminent danger, some highly developed civilizations, extremely interested in this, have built a complex to reflect the anti-asteroid danger. In other words, these are really man-made devices, and they destroy these meteorites. And not only those that can destroy the Earth or cause the effect of a nuclear winter, but even those that most often carry dangerous bacteria, whose entry into the Earth's ecosystem will lead to an instant change and their own destruction of civilization. And now this installation has been built, and it really either rejects large asteroids, at least it tries. And it's always been that way for the last 25,000 years for sure. And this installation, it did not appear immediately in its entirety. So powerful and capable, it also developed gradually. So somewhere there were shots more or less successful and effective, somewhere there were less successful and effective. But the mechanism of action of this installation uses a powerful electromagnetic field, the generator of which is the Earth itself. When this object is discharged, I call it a terminator. It's a ball. These are, as a rule, balls of different diameters. The big ball, which is ever mentioned, and with which people have encountered, is an object in the diameter of 60 meters. Imagine a 60-meter ball. It is pumped up by a powerful electromagnetic field, during the discharge of which traces of radioactivity appear. In the ancient Indian tradition, this instrument was called a Brahmastra. That is, it is the weapon of a Brahma, the highest deity, who, strictly speaking, caused unrest on earth. Like Majidara, for example. There were people who lived in this town, and suddenly a meteorite falls, carrying dangerous bacteria. It's flying straight, as they say. That's it, now there will be a real Zustrik. It's not the installation's fault that people built a city in this place. She lives and lives her life. In short, a terminator collided with a meteorite with a powerful release of energy over this city. People died immediately. Colossal melting and traces of radioactivity. What does the wars of the gods have to do with it?
But it was necessary to bring some theory under this, another one, different from the one that we are revealing now.
Who cares, really? I'll say that.
Welcome to the course.
Yes, the Tunguska meteorite was destroyed by this installation, the Chelyabinsk one by this installation, and the Vidum one and many others. This setup worked and is still working. And every year she makes dozens of shots. And I think that if we get to the course and talk about this particular installation in such detail, I'll show you a video of how it works. Amazing video. It is quite obvious that we have been on Earth for a very long time and are not alone and are adjacent to a very highly developed civilization that protects the Earth and itself.
Good news. And the first thing you said scared me a little.
Come on.
Okay, let's move on. And after this nuclear explosion, something remained in the form of artifacts that, one of which, the most famous, is called the Helmet of Ra. That's the story.
Knowledge about these instruments was passed on to people at the turn of the very events, when the solar system passed through the asteroid stream. When Mars fell, when the planet Phaidon fell, and those who were on planet Earth. This is the expedition group of the planet Mars and Tiamat. They gave people knowledge about certain tools, very important tools, among which was the one that is not very correct today. But they call it the helmet of Ra. This is a very curious device, quite complex, consisting of two main parts. The diadem, I call Atlantean, is like a bowl, opened up, and an elongated crown, with such a ball knob on top. One was inserted into the other, and inside this upper part, where we see this circle, a quartz crystal was placed there. A crystal obtained from another planet. This concentrator, its main function was as follows: the harmonization of the two counterflows of the yin-yang tank. To do this structure, it was made of two metals. On the left side, there was zinc, on the right copper. Copper was fused with gold, zinc with silver. The upper part is the same. Electrical charges were inserted and harmonized between the right and left half of the brain. Then the flow that comes to a person from above, due to the re-reflection of the inner and passing through the crystal, fell on the brain. But this alignment of the electrical potential led to the fact that the brain worked much better as an antenna. And the person began what we call telepathic communication. This is clearly hearing and clairvoyance. This hub was used as a receiving antenna, transmitting and transforming, and allowing a person to open a channel of communication with the outer space. Not only with the Earth's field, but also with outer space.
Well, I want to understand, is it an artifact that has been preserved in its physical manifestation, like, for example, some kind of excavations, or is it information preserved about what it is and how?
No, it's physical. These crowns have been found. ATP crown and so on. They were found. Another thing is that they are called the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt.
Yes, I heard.
There, the upper ones were the upper one, and the lower ones were the lower one.
In fact, you need to combine everything.
Of course.
Put it on correctly.
And it's not just right to put it on, you also need to put it all on at a strictly defined time. When a strictly defined flow of very specific subtle energy passes, then it makes sense. In other words, it's the same thing, I want to say, when, for example, you have a receiver in your hands, and you want to listen to, for example, well, roughly speaking, there is the voice of Moscow. But the voice of Moscow works between, roughly speaking, 11 o'clock in the afternoon and 20 minutes past 11. And you try to turn it on at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Nothing will happen. We need to clearly know what time it is necessary to enable, configure, in a certain way, and then you'll hear a voice.
Curious. Now, I want to ask you the following. Here was the Atlantean civilization, which had very advanced knowledge. There is a legend again that these people, souls, let's say, begin to reincarnate in certain territories, remember or unpack themselves, become aware of themselves quickly enough, and then broadcast knowledge further. What can you say on this topic?
The idea is bright, but it has a very distant relation to reality. Let's start from the beginning then. With regard to the specific advancement, technical moreover, civilization Atlanta. That's really who, but the Atlantans were not technically advanced at all. These were people who were engaged in the development of their parapsychological abilities. And along the way, they have achieved tremendous success. We achieved it because, unlike our contemporaries, from us today, they did not engage in reasoning, long rants, pyramids. And what is it? With what is it on bread to Mars? They built, and they used them. And as practice has shown, building a pyramid is far from everything. Not only does it have to be built from the right materials, in the right places and all that, it turns out that you still need to live a certain life in the pyramid, when your brains are tuned in a certain way, and I will say right away, that your child's abilities will be much higher, because the pyramid affects the brain structures in a certain way. And the brain begins to open up with a completely unexpected side. Will strong Atlantans grow up with this? That's it. Of course, when they discovered these abilities in themselves, it must be said that after the first and second great catastrophes, before the fall of the Azores asteroid, which occurred 13,675 years ago, the Atlantans were those who, using their pyramid, were an intermediate link between the outer cosmos and the planet Earth. It was a space communications center, and they were the last who carried a stunning level of knowledge. In that knowledge, one of the topics was just the topic of reincarnation. Just to be born in some village, and at the age of 2, some Mosik suddenly has such abilities that just hold on, so at the age of 2. This will not happen under any circumstances. Because in order for opportunities to begin to open up, brain structures and physical bodies, and so on, must go through a certain transformation cycle. And this cycle is equal, the first cycle, to 7 years. That's about 7 years from now, somewhere. It's like Jesus Christ at 33. Not before, but at 33. A separate conversation. We talk about that too.
On the course.
Yes, on the course. So, to say that some hear music, suddenly there was light and began. No. Reincarnation doesn't work like that. It works on a completely different principle, which we will also consider on the course. Because today, we have raised so many topics with you that I feel vibrationally people are already beginning to get tired. For now, let's say that the idea that that bridge was born in the village, and saw the light at the age of 2, and began to work miracles, is wrong in principle.
Well, I think that here we mean certain conditions, a certain family, as it should be.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. If a person is put in certain conditions, where he will have a special tool, special parents who will not hinder, who will push.
From the point of view of the principle or mechanism of reincarnation, then this Mosik here should be born in the pyramid, in which he died in a previous life.
Let's assume this is the case.
No, not suppose, but so.
So, it turns out, then some of the knowledge was simply taken out of this formulation. First and last, the offer is said, but people were not given the filling. How does this happen?
You're kind. No, not the first, not the last, but everything was taken out. Yes, they took it out so that they didn't figure out what was what. And you can only figure it out if you go all the way of Christ. And that's when you'll understand how it is. Otherwise, we will constantly encounter such information that has nothing to do with reality. So, the place should be the one where you died in a previous life. The time should be special. Parents should be very non-random, and you should be born after a strictly defined time after the Sodas cycle. In the right place at the right time in compliance with all the conditions, then yes.
Well, if these conditions are met, is there such a possibility that we still have someone here?
20,000 years have passed and nothing has happened. And when a person like Jesus Christ appeared and said, "Guys, I'm going to tell you now," he was immediately killed. Right there.
Well, someone is disguised here.
Not just masked. Look, here Lucius wasn't interested. Seth is extremely uninterested. After all, look, what is one of the most important ideas? What did Jesus Christ talk about? Do what I will do. Here I will show you by my example. And what was the thought? And you will know sin. That is, it does not mean that you drink it like a cup of sweet wine, but you will see it on a cannon shot. Immediately recognize. You will understand which step will lead to what. And you will never sin again, he said. And who needs it? And then there's the hop, and now the time is coming. Now is the time to talk about this topic. That's why we're starting this conversation. And if we give people back the knowledge, in fact, how it works, and I am convinced that anyone who hears and analyzes it, he will not have a shadow of doubt that this is exactly how it works. And if only one element is extracted, everything does not work. We will have an amazing course ahead of us, I am convinced. For those who are interested.
Well, then let's say that under the video that you are watching now, there is a link to the registration of the Still Free module, which will consist of at least 10 very interesting lessons that will already put the head and the two hemispheres will synchronize at least.
Yes, in place.
Yes, and then of course, it will be even more interesting. So just go right ahead and register. There is already the first preliminary lesson, which we will continue to develop and disclose. And on this excellent note, I think we will conclude our dialogue today.
Thank you, as always, for the tremendously cool questions. And carried it is very important. You know how, you know how, you know how. Thank you for that. So, well, we move on.